Welcome back to the Early Childhood Chats podcast. Andy with you as always. And today being joined by Kathy Haule, all the way from Texas. We're going to be talking about literacy and why it is important to start them off young. Kathy, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you very much. It's nice to talk with you.
Well, it's really nice for you to be here. I appreciate it. We were kind of running in the same circles down in South Padre, Texas, not too long ago, but unfortunately, we didn't have a chance to connect in person. So I'm really, really grateful that you had some time today to spend with us.
Well, I'm glad to be here. Also, it's always good to be able to talk to early childhood practitioners around the country.
So if you could please give us a little bit of an introduction, a background. Who are you? What you doing? How did you get in this space? And why do you love it so much?
Well, I guess I would say I started out as an elementary school teacher. And as I started to pursue going into administration, I had an opportunity to be the principal at a large early childhood center in the public school district where I was working. And it was just a great place. There was a wonderful staff and so much support from the families and the whole community for early childhood education. It just really clicked with me. It made me think like, oh, I should have gone into this a little earlier. But from at that location, I worked with, again, public school pre-kindergarten, which in the state of Texas is for children who have some sort of risk factor in their lives. Although we did do some tuition-based programs also. We collaborated with the local Head Start agency. So I was familiar with what was going on there and the similarities and differences between the state-run school program and the federally funded Head Start program. From there, I moved to another district and helped them to open an early childhood center in the public school, and then continued to be an early childhood supervisor for the large school district in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. Along the way, I became very interested in what was happening in private early learning programs, childcare centers, home-based programs, and became an assessor for the state's quality rating and improvement system. And that was such a great way for me to continue being involved with what was happening before the children ever got to school. We know from brain research that a lot of the development actually happens before they ever get to school. And so it became very important to me that I do something to influence what was happening in those earliest of years for the children. Along the way, I've done a lot of staff development for both private and publicly funded centers and schools. I enjoy some of the travel with that, but I must say that I enjoy it less now that I have a 3-year-old granddaughter. And she's like my test case as I try out my strategies and put into practice all the things that I've learned through the years.
Well, that is just fantastic. And I've got a 3-year-old running around here somewhere too. So maybe we could get them together for a play date at some point.
Yeah, we're a little far apart, Andy.
Well, that's true. That is true. Although she does travel pretty well. Well, I'm really excited to hear, we talk a lot about kind of early childhood and the importance. And as you hit the nail right on the head, boy, oh boy, what a time for somebody's brain to be developing, right? 90% before the age of 5, just the most active your brain's going to be ever. And of course, we always advocate, gosh, if the brain is so active and it's so important, the funding should be there too, right? Which we know we struggle with, unfortunately. So think about kind of your experience moving from the public schools into early childhood, and you've straddled that universe very successfully. I know some of the critique we sometimes get because it is a trend that we're seeing. A lot of the schools are now trying to grab those 4 and 5-year-olds and put them into the school system. But oftentimes we do hear, gosh, the principal at my school doesn't get early childhood, or he doesn't understand how a 4-year-old's different than an 8-year-old, and kind of on and on. It sounds like you haven't had that experience, but then again, you're kind of self-admittedly to be passionate about early childhood education.
Well, I would say that I have encountered people in situations like that. As part of my role as the early childhood supervisor, I was charged with starting pre-kindergarten programs at elementary campuses, and that always began with rich conversations with the administrators what do those school principals need to know as is part of it? Many of them would admit, I don't know much about, young children. And so I would, provide manageable doses of information to them along the way so that they could, make sense of it and also be good leaders of the staff, providing the resources that they needed to see things happen in the classrooms.
Well, that's fantastic. Yeah, I mean, you think about even the furniture design and all that stuff is just so different between a 4-year-old and a 6, 7, 8-year old, right? I mean, it's a whole different ball game. So I'm glad to hear you've had that experience. You talked a lot in the conference in South Padre about kind of our communication, right? How are we interacting with our young children? How are we verbalizing things to help that brain development? Certainly, we've seen a tremendous change over the years with television and then internet and then streaming services and then a global pandemic and then kind of on and on and on. I'm curious as you reflect on kind of literacy and talking to our children and the importance of that engagement. What have you seen change throughout your career?
Unfortunately, I've seen adults talking to children less than they used to. And on the positive side, though, there's been this resurgence of the importance of oral language in young children. And so that's where I really see my place is encouraging people to talk to their children or the children that they're caring for. They'll never be good readers if they're not able to talk and listen and understand what's going on. One of my favorite quotes that I share in many of my sessions is by psycholinguist James Britton. And he said that reading and writing float on a sea of talk. So the teachers that work with those very young children, they're putting water into the reservoir, into the ocean, because without that background, there's nothing for the reading and writing skills to rest on. There's no reason to read and write if you don't understand what the words mean. And so, I really look to that oral language as being the key for so much of the child's life, not just literacy, but social skills, all kinds of for future learning skills as well.
Well, and certainly I hope everybody's familiar with some of the great research that's been done at Kansas and OSU and other places. We talk a lot about the kind of the word gap, right? Or the word goal that we need.
Mhm.
Gosh, I think it's about 21,000 words a day that kids need to hear to really start that whole memory and language and syntax and speaking and all that kind of development. And, sadly, when we look at some of the Head Start population and other programs that are serving low income areas, we see that word gap. It's really dramatic, right? I mean, it goes from 21,000 words, and sometimes studies have shown 2, 3, 5,000 words a day. It's just simply not enough. You're not giving that reservoir enough water to fill up, are you?
That's exactly right. We don't want there to be a drought.
So, and the other interesting thing I have seen, especially kind of in this COVID pandemic that we've lived through, sadly, the last several years, it's not good enough. It's not enough, I guess I should say, just to plop your kid in front of an iPad or a television. The brain actually, it's different, right? If you're actually being talked to by a human and engaged with by a human versus just sitting in front of a TV.
Right, absolutely. And there's been research from the early days of computer assisted instruction about the importance of having human feedback. And yes, you can learn some things from a device, whether it's a tablet or a cell phone or whatever, but it's the feedback that's going to cement that place in the children's brains where they can continue to use and to grow more in their oral language skills.
So I know you did a whole session on this in South Padre. Do you mind giving us some cliff notes? What are some good ways to engage kids? How do we get them talking? How do we talk to them? I know, and I've got a 3-year-old and a 9-month-old, and I got to admit, Kathy, sometimes I probably look really stupid when I'm out in public, but I am literally providing this running narrative. It kind of looks like I'm talking to myself, but I'm actually narrating to my 9-month-old about, hey, I'm going to go to this shelf and pick up this orange box or this red box. And I've gotten some goofy looks over the years, of course, doing this with my kids, but I feel like that's a good
Yeah.
thing to kind of narrate out loud, kind of what's happening and keep talking to them, keep them engaged.
Absolutely. And I've had that same kind of thing happen. When I had my daughter, I didn't know nearly as much as I do now about young children. So, I was busy mom, working and all that, and I don't really remember how much I talked to her. But now that I'm so aware of it, I talk to my granddaughter nonstop, just like what you were saying, narrating what was going on in the world around. So much so that my husband and my daughter both said to me, "Are you ever going to stop talking to that child?" And I said, "No, I'm not. That's the key. I mean, I've got to be talking to her." And I think I must have, did something with my daughter or my granddaughter, because she does talk nonstop now. And the other thing is, when she likes to play make believe that she's a baby, she tells me I have to talk to her. And so I think that, okay, she got the message that that's what adults do with babies. So I just hope that that will stay with her for time. But actually, some of the things that I shared in my session are really based on an article called More Than Baby Talk, which was put out by the Frank Porter Graham Child Development Institute. And they identified various strategies that staff members, adults, parents can use with their children. And I really focused on 4 or 5 of those. And the first one was to do exactly what you're saying, Andy, to be a narrator, to be a commentator. And I use the picture of, if you watch a sports event on TV, be it football or soccer or whatever it is you watch, there are usually 2 commentators there. One is a play-by-play commentator. They're the one that tells you, the quarterback has picked up the ball and they've run 7 yards and passed it off to the receiver, whatever. They're giving you the play-by-play. So if you were listening to this game on the radio, you would be able to hear and you'd know what was going on. The other commentator is referred to as the color commentator. And they're the ones that provide all the background, all the juicy human interest kind of things. And so they're the ones who might tell you things like, this is the 4th time since 1992 that this happened on the 50-yard line. Or they might tell you something about Taylor Swift's boyfriend in the appropriate context. So that's the color commentator. They provide the details that makes it more interesting. Well, as a parent or teacher working with a young child, your role is to really do both of those things. You would need to be the play-by-play commentator and talk about what's happening around you. We're going out the door now to get into the car. I'm going to put you into your car seat, and you're doing the play-by-play. But at the same time, you want to be the color commentator and tell them more details as you're going along. All right, now I've put on your green dress. We're going to go walk through the white door, and I'm going to lift you very carefully into your car seat. And so I'm providing more information for the child about what's going on. And then, of course, as kind of mundane things are happening, you provide even more about what's going on around the child. And so I have teachers during the sessions practice a couple of different things. One, the teacher can talk about what the teacher is doing. So, if the teacher's washing her hands, she can be telling the child what she's doing as she's teaching. Same thing would happen, with a parent. They're talking about what they themselves are doing. The next thing that you could do is to talk about what the child is doing. So if the child is playing with some blocks on the floor, you can talk about it. Oh, I see that you've picked up the yellow and blue block. Can you set them on top of the green block? So you're giving more information about what the child is doing. And then the last thing that falls underneath the idea of being a commentator is to talk about what you and the child are doing together. In that case, you might sit down and be playing blocks with the child, but you're talking about what you're doing along with talking about what the child's doing. And I know when we talk with really young children, sometimes it's a matter of them just smiling or goo-gooing at it, but that's their attempt at talking. And so we want to be, cognizant of that yes, they are talking, they are communicating with us, even though it might not be in the form most commonly understood. So that first strategy that I talk about is to be a commentator from there. And then another strategy that we talk about with folks is to really tune in to the children. What are the children interested in? You might be interested in a particular book that's in the classroom or in your home, but if the child's not interested in it, Reading about it or talking about it is not going to get anywhere if that child is fascinated by the stuffed elephant that's over in the corner. You're much better off sharing information about that elephant. And even if you don't know much about elephants, make it up. You can talk about that it's a play elephant, pretend, and that we're doing things together with it. So, you want to think about really tuning in to what that child is doing, what that child is interested in. And then another thing you want to think about doing with the children is really having conversations. And a conversation implies the idea that there's a back and forth. And it's really the most common way that we as adults talk. It's, right now, Andy and I are having a conversation, even though I'm doing a lot of talking right now, but I know that he's there and he's going to say something back to me as feedback. Well, the same thing happens with all of you, I'm sure. You don't spend most of your time just lecturing or talking to yourself. You're having communication with other people. You're teaching young children turn taking, which, my goodness, we know that's an important thing to do from the time they're learning to get in line or get something to eat with you to the time that they're going to learn how to drive. You have to know how to take turns. And so both of those things happen within the course of having a conversation. So when we talk about having conversations with children, we want to think about, in order for it to be a meaningful conversation, that either the adult and or the child have at least 3 to 5 turns. And again, with young children, it may be just a gaze in your direction. Instead of looking away, it may be just a sound. With older children, it's going to be a word or two, up to the point where they're even asking you questions. But you want to be counting turns back and forth. And you don't want to just ask a question like, can you give me that ball? That kind of ends the conversation unless you take it beyond there, the child takes it beyond there. In order to do that, it's good to ask open-ended questions, although it's not always required to do that. And by open-ended question, I mean one that does not require just a yes or a no as an answer. With young children, sometimes that's where we start, and then they move as their language really explodes, as they become more familiar with words, they understand the words, and they give back from there. One of the other strategies I like to talk about is the idea of return, serve and return, which is an idea that's very common in the care of infants, in that if we think about a game of tennis or racquetball, some kind of sport like that, somebody serves the ball and somebody hits it back. Well, that's what's happening when you're interacting with young children. And most adults think that the adults are the ones that are serving, but really the children are the ones that are serving. And it may be by them making a sound. It may be by them looking towards something or trying to crawl towards something. They are serving to you, showing you their interest. And then your job is to hit it back to them. Put it back in their court, so to speak, by providing some words, talking about what it is they are doing. And then they're going to serve it back to you. And so you're taking turns with the children, letting them be the lead as you go from there. So I'd say that those are probably my top strategies that I encourage teachers to use when they're working with young children.
No, I love it. I love the serve and return. A lot of good stuff from there. So a couple things that kind of come to mind. First off, what does kind of the baby talk do? Gaga, goo goo, and this kind of stuff. Is that helpful? Is that hurtful? Does it not matter in the scheme of things? Or what is kind of the thought on the baby talk when you're engaging with a young child?
Are you talking about the adults doing baby talk or the children?
Good question. I'm talking about the adults. Like, a grandma who will remain nameless in my family loves to come up to my young one and gaga goo goo ba ba ba, and I'm not exactly sure that that's meeting that 21,000 words and that's even helpful at this point. I don't know what the research is.
Yeah, I wouldn't get on grandma because she's being loving and caring, and that may be what she knows right now. But really, no, it doesn't, because when we provide input to children, whether it's about language or anything else, we want them to provide just a little more than what they're able to do themselves. And if your little one is already doing goo goo and gaga by themselves, you want to take them to the next level. And so by modeling good language, you're showing them that that's how we communicate. Yes, developmentally, they have to go through the cooing and the babbling and the baba, kinds of things, but you really want them to learn how to talk like a grown up. And so you're much better off modeling what it is that you want them to do. And I would say, along kind of as a corollary of that, many times when we have people who speak more than one language, and if, for example, if they're in the United States and English is the most common language, but their English itself is not very good, they're much better off modeling and talking to the child in their home language. They're teaching them what language is about and how to make complete thoughts about that. And so it's much better to speak well in a language in which you're comfortable than to speak poorly in a language that you feel the child should learn. The child will learn multiple languages if they are exposed to them when they are young. And so, we want to be good role models of language, not poor ones, no matter, what it is. And I'm definitely a proponent of speaking more than one language, or of a children learning to speak more than one language. The brain research really supports that the time to do that is when they're young.
Yeah, I can firsthand tell you the time to do it is not in high school or in college. It doesn't go so well.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, there's research out there that shows if a child has been exposed to a second language in great quantity before the age of 7, their brain will be set to learn multiple languages throughout their life. And we're in almost the same way that they learned their first language. It's not going to be like how hard it is for people to learn another language when they're, like you say, in high school, or college. It's going to come much more naturally when they learn it as young people, when their brains are still very pliable and they still have that part of the brain that is very active in language acquisition.
Yeah, just think about so many things I wish I, as an adult, could do, like speak a lot of language. I can speak a little tiny Spanish and some Polish, but not where I'd like to be. And gosh, the other thing is like play the piano. Wouldn't that be fun to do? But trying to push my youngsters and like go learn these languages, go play the piano, learn all this stuff when you're young and have that sponge of a brain, right?
Right, right. And your kids are definitely at the age for that. And but the key too is making it fun. Making it fun for them. I mean, young children learn through play. And so whatever we want them to learn, we want them to do it in a playful way because it's going to stick more with them and they're going to have greater interest and desire to do it than being forced to do it.
That's an excellent point. And I was going to ask you, what is the role of kind of like props or toys or other things when it comes to language? I would seem to think the more kind of senses you're engaging, maybe the more bang for the buck you're getting. But I honestly, I don't know. Does it help to have like a banana and pretend like it's a phone and these types of things when we're thinking about
Oh
literacy?
yes, I mean that's another stage of play development that happens with young children, and again they will go through that as they progress in play. They will use real objects as the real object, like that banana that you mentioned would be. They could play with it as a real banana and would probably try to eat it. But as they mature in the play, kind of 3, 4, 5 year olds, they will start using those props as other objects to meet their needs. So maybe a block becomes a cell phone or a banana becomes a hammer. I mean, I wouldn't recommend that, but no, seriously, any kind of object becomes a toy. So does it mean more is better? Not necessarily. You don't want to overwhelm children with toys. Give them access to, you know, there needs to be variety. I don't know how to say this, but you don't want to overwhelm them and fill their shelves and their toy boxes with multiple things. They need to be able to see the toys, to see the options that are out there for them so they can make choices of what to do and see them clearly. And if you're in a classroom doing that, you can rotate the toys in and out. You don't have to have everything out on the shelves at the same time. Watch and see which toys do the children not really play with and rotate those out for a while. Put something out there. There's something about things being new and novel. There's something new out there. They're going to want to try it out. And it gives you an opportunity to talk about that new toy as well.
I'm curious with all your experience. I'm sure you've seen a classroom where you've got, a couple kids that are just so engaged and so energetic, and you probably have seen a classroom where you've got a couple kids that are a little bit shy and a little bit skittish or standoffish. And I'm wondering if you have any thoughts for our educators out there. How do I kind of not let the eager ones dominate the conversation? I certainly want them to stay eager, but I also want to make sure I'm reaching those, ones that are a little bit more shy or a little bit more timid.
Right, right. Well, it's definitely in the teacher's hands to be able to do that. One of the first things, particularly when you're talking with children who are not yet comfortable talking around others, would be to get down at their level, so that you're, down at their eye level, not talking from above them. If they're not talking much, it's probably because they're a little anxious about it, either for social reasons or because they feel that they're not competent to do it. And so you want them to feel comfortable. Some gentle physical touch, a pat on the back, a handshake when they come in, or whatever, to let them know, and to sit close to them, when it is time for them to play. Many times you can invite them over to an area to see if they'll be interested in it. When they do choose things to play with themselves, kind of make a mental note of that, and then you yourself can go and play with that particular item. And again, your conversations with the related to that object and the child will spur on additional language development for the child. So you show interest in the same thing that they're showing interest in, and they will come along. I think it's also important in the classrooms to do things in small groups. And I know sometimes that's not always possible because of staffing issues, but anytime that you can, get a group of 2 to 5 children together, rather than a class of 10 or 15, you're going to have an opportunity. It's harder to hide in a group of 5 than a group of 15. And so every child will have the opportunity, a better opportunity, to play their part and to, do what it is that's being asked of them, to explore and to not fear retribution for doing something wrong.
Excellent, excellent points. And I know we talked a little bit briefly kind of about screen time and how that's not really a replacement for actually engaging and talking to the child, which I think everyone can appreciate and understand. I'm wondering about books. What about like reading books in the class and that type of thing? What kind of engagement does that give the child? Is that better than screen time, worse than screen time, about the same as screen time, or what do you feel about the books?
I think it depends on how the book is read. If the teacher just reads the book and reads it rapidly, the children can't see the pictures, and there's no time for talking about what's happening in the story, then it's really not making a big difference. Where you're going to see the most power from reading to children, and yes, I do definitely recommend reading to children, is to read it at least 3 times over the course of a couple of weeks. The first time that you read the story, you're really going to be, focusing on that main character and what's the plot. You're just establishing the basis for understanding the story. And after you read the story, you want to talk with the child, with the children, about, what happened, what was going on in this story. And again, really kind of focusing on what's happening with the main character, the main activities. And then the second time that you go through, you might want to be focusing on some of the vocabulary that they may not have caught the first time through, but read it again, giving them, encourage them to talk while you're reading, not while you're reading, but stop and pause and ask for comments and questions from the children as you're going through the book. And then again, ask some review questions about what some of the other characters are doing, what some of the possibilities would be, some of the predictions or maybe alternate endings that might come about, if they changed up the story a bit. And then the third time, and you can read it multiple times after that, would be to have the children help you to retell the story. And by that time, they're going to know the basic understanding of the story. They'll hopefully will have learned some key vocabulary that they can use in retelling the story. I think that the vocabulary that you want to emphasize when you're doing the story would be some words that they would need to use if they were telling somebody else the story.
Mm.
So if they go home and mom says, well, what did you do at school today? You don't want them to say nothing like the older children will all do, although they start doing that at a very early age, I must say. But give them some, some words that they could use to tell mom or dad about the story that the teacher read, so they can go from there. And again, if you have little ones that are not yet able to retell, these two-year olds or younger, you might provide information to the parents, just a brief summary of the book that was read. So, and maybe even some suggested questions so that the families could follow up on what's going on in the classroom with the books. But yeah, reading to children. I know my local library has a program for reading 1,000 books to your child before they start kindergarten. So
Wow.
that's what the goal of, is for families to do that.
Simply fantastic. I don't know if it still exists. I know I missed the Pizza Hut Book It program when I was a kid, right? That was always some
Right.
good
Well, I mean, that
encouragement.
was good for encouraging reading, but it almost was doing it for the wrong reason,
So I
because
could get my
the
pizza.
children, so you could get your pizza. Yeah. And that's not really to instill the love of reading.
Right.
And so, yes, it did get some kids reading, but, I'm not sure that it really cemented the joy of reading.
Yeah, I know.
Joy
I
of
agree with
pizza, maybe.
you. I do enjoy a good pizza. But
Yes, I do too.
so it's kind of like anything else. I mean, you think about a young child hearing a word for the first time, and they probably need to hear a word several times, I would think, to really start understanding and grasping, right? So this repetition, as you're talking about, reading a book a couple of times, doing it a couple different ways, that's probably real important when you start thinking about the brain development and how we're actually learning and processing the information.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, repetition helps us to learn anything. I know I read somewhere you have to hear somebody's phone number like 7 times in order for to memorize it. You have to hear, different things certain number of times. I don't know a set number for young children, because again, their interest level in what it is you're teaching them
Yeah.
goes a long way in learning thing. If you're talking with them about something that they don't that they are interested in, it's going to stick with them much faster than if it's something that's totally foreign. So you always want to build on their experience and show how things are alike and different, and move things along, build from that interest as you're introducing new concepts.
One of the things I've noticed lately with, I guess she's almost 3. Well, she'll be 4 here in January, so she's coming up on it. But she's kind of switched from just reading the books and being an active kind of listener, and we do the back and forth and engage. But in the last probably month or so, she's actually started asking me, Daddy, what does this word mean? And the first time I
Oh,
heard that, it
wow.
took me aback, right? I'm like, oh my God, what do you mean? What does this word mean? Um, but I appreciated your comments because, I too, of course, quiz my little ones when they get back. Hey, what happened today? And I had never
Right.
really thought about, well, maybe it's the vocabulary. Maybe I don't think we should shy away from the big words, but certainly, presenting something to them in a way that they can comprehend and repeat and understand. It does make a lot of sense. I'd never thought about that before.
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, you want to use those big words, as you go along. I was very surprised the other day. My granddaughter loves to watch The Lion King, like many children, do. And I don't know, she saw some variation on it where I guess Scar was starting to do things the right way. He was turning to the good side or whatever. And she said to me, I think that Scar is starting to understand how to be good. And that just blew me away that she could use the word understand
Right. It's a
that
big word,
way.
right?
That is a big word, and she was using it very appropriately. I mean, to me, it was like that's like, kind of like a high level skill to do in the first place. But I was more surprised at her using the word, in that way. And so, yeah, definitely big words are not to be shied away from, and even big concepts. Assuming that they're age appropriate and not adult content, but we want them to, they have big ideas. We want them to be able to think about, things that in their real world. I mean, our kids are exposed to so many things just through media, even if we don't want them to be exposed to it. And just, life is complicated. So they need words to express their big ideas.
I have found that actually kind of purposely pointing or naming has been really helpful too, right? So if they have a toy or whatever, much like you were saying in kind of the grocery store, I mean, the grocery store is phenomenal, right? You go up and down these
Oh, yes.
aisles and there's so many different colors and everything else. Um, but to be very specific and very purposeful about like, hey, if my child is pointing to A, B, or C, like I'm going to point with you and I'm going to name that for you. And it seems like that maybe helps a little bit. I don't know. It seems like it's working for me.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And so, they're learning those words. It's much better to use a specific label and descriptor than to say this or that.
Mm.
Those are very vague terms. And if you say, give that to me, they may not be sure of what the that is. And they're certainly not learning any new vocabulary from that. And here I use the word that.
If you don't mind, I'd love to kind of shift a tiny bit. And I recognize, the work that you've done, Texas Rising Stars, quality initiatives, all of that. Obviously, a lot of what we're talking about here really goes to the quality of that early childhood program. And I know that certainly as a parent and somebody in early childhood education, like for many parents, just finding the program is kind of the goal, right? Oh, I need a place with a slot. I need a place that actually has
Mhm.
capacity. And, just kind of reflecting on all the stuff that you have seen, why is this quality for early childhood so darn important?
Well, I think it's very important because of the time of life that we're talking about for the children. The window of opportunity, the optimal time for them to develop so many skills is before age 5. Some of those, that optimal window actually closes around age 3. And so we want to make sure that we're giving the best that we can to them during those early years. But yes, I know exactly what you mean. I mean, it's parents are looking for price and they're looking for location of their early learning programs, and we need to look a little bit deeper, also. And I think because of the quality rating programs in various states now, they are providing some support, with that again, families just need to be aware of those things and what really to look for when they're visiting a potential placement for their child.
I'd like you to put on your magical hat, your thinking machine here. Take a look at kind of the wizardry and reflect on all the years you spent in early childhood education. And I would love it if you could maybe make some ideas, suggestions. Where are we going as an industry? I know we've had a lot of challenges. Do you think that we're on the right trajectory, or what do we really need to do to become that recognized workforce with pay parity and get resource appropriated and all that at a good level? Where do you think we're kind of headed as an early childhood industry?
Wow, that is a big question. I'd like to say pray for a miracle. Would is my first thought, because yes, I think we are definitely on the right track as far as um, emphasizing the quality in early learning programs. I still think we have a long way to go in collaborating between different agencies that do serve young children. I think particularly, public school and child care centers, they can be great supporters and collaborators of one another. They don't have to view each other as competition in my mind.
Yeah.
And so, that would be one thing. And I think just certainly awareness in the general public and lawmakers, policymakers that, this isn't going to, have a low price tag on it. This isn't something that we do because just because moms are going back into the workforce. We kind of passed that. I mean, I don't know about you, Andy, but I mean, when I was growing up, my mom stayed at home while we were at home. I don't know that there were any early learning programs around where, I lived. And so that was just the expectation. But in these days, that's not, what happens. And so we need to do it and do it well. High quality childcare should be a consideration for families if they make a move, just like high quality school districts. So, that would be my hope, that people would look at matching the funding with the
Yeah.
value that is accruing because of the investment in these young children.
It's so odd. It's one of the few areas of agreement we have politically in the country anymore. And
Mm-hmm.
it just seems like, gosh, this is a problem that we should be able to solve. Do you think in our lifetime we will see publicly funded early childhood education the same way we do like public school, elementary school, middle school, et cetera?
Um, I don't know. I think that we probably will for people who are at disadvantage, economically disadvantaged, those that, are have some kind of risk factors that have been identified. I'm not sure that in my lifetime I would see publicly funded um, early childhood. I'd love to say yes. Maybe I'm being a doubter, but I don't really know. I think there's a lot of emphasis in our country on um, competition
Yeah.
in the business sense, and that's not bad. So it may be that just like public schools have competition in the private school world or in charter schools, whatever they might be, maybe it would, come to something like that. I would love to see something like that, but I also believe it is important that um, families are able to choose things that will, meet their needs and their young children. When children are young, they're just such special treasures of their families. And so many things about the children yet are not yet known. And so, it takes time to get to know that and to get to know how each child, works. And I think that's much better done in smaller settings rather than large settings. So I'd love to see a mix of both.
Well, you've got such a great background, and again, we see this battle, and I put battle in quotes, but we see this battle kind of playing out in many locations throughout the country now, where many in the early childhood community feel like, gosh, the public system, the public school system is coming for me, and there's only so many 4 and 5 year olds to go around, and of course the birth rates have been kind of steadily declining over the years,
Mm-hmm.
and I mean, I honestly, I have a conversation with folks probably once a week about like, gosh, the early childhood education future is going to be that 0 to 3 because look, no public school wants that at this point, at least. And certainly we see that with, Head Start enrollment, early Head Start enrollment, all of that. So I do have many
Sure,
that are
sure.
concerned that like, gosh, in a few years, maybe the only clients I'm getting are 0 to 2, 0 to 3, because I'm worried the public school system's going to try to go after and grab my 4 and 5 year olds. And it's kind of
Yeah, well,
concerning to hear that.
yeah, it is. And I think that there are opportunities though for collaboration. I was involved with a collaboration in another community at one point where we had a public school teacher, a Head Start teacher, and a child development center teacher working together in the classroom so that they could cover extended hours and again collaborating. It did take some work to work through because each program had different rules, different guidelines, different regulations that they had to follow, but it was able to meet the needs of a group of parents that would not have been able to take part in that. I also think that public schools need to not be afraid of collaborating with child care centers. So often I think childcare or let's say public educators often have a bad view of child care centers, like they're not as good as we are. And that is certainly not the case. As a Texas Rising Star assessor, I saw some fantastic teachers working in early learning programs out in the community. And so, whether it's by sharing teachers in those classrooms or by having wraparound programs and summer programs, perhaps. Yeah, I think there are many opportunities for the private and the public to collaborate. But again, it does take time and it has to take open mindsets on all parties to make it happen and happen well.
Very fantastic points. I'd love to see more of that collaboration, cooperation. Stop calling us babysitters, by the way.
Yeah.
That would be a big step. For those young folks that are just starting to think about careers and would like to get into early childhood, certainly you've got a really unique and interesting career path. What kind of advice would you give to that next generation? If you want to work in early childhood, what should you be thinking about? What should you expect? What are some of the pros and maybe some of the cons so you come into this field eyes wide open?
I think it's important that they get some real honest to goodness experience with young children, whether it's by doing an internship or, doing a part-time work while you're going to school, working around young children, so that you can find out, is this something that I want to do for my whole day? I think it's also very important that young people who are wanting to go into early childhood learn as much as they can about child development, brain development. Many times sometimes people that are in early childhood, either in the public or the private sector, are just doing it because it's a job, and they really don't know that much about how the child develops. And so I think it's important that you understand that and are able to explain that to coworkers and family members. There are a lot of folks out there who don't know about all the ins and outs of the development of a child. And so if that's a field you're interested in, I would encourage you to get as much experience and knowledge about the just basic principles of child development as you're, working through. And I would also suggest becoming more familiar, if you're not already, with people from diverse backgrounds. The rate at which our child care programs in our schools are filling with people from other countries, other languages, which again adds to the richness of our communities. But there are differences, and you have to be able to be open to those kind of differences in order to serve the children and families well.
Absolutely. All really good points. It's a very hands-on, intensive line of work, but I think you'll agree it's probably one of the more rewarding career paths you can choose.
Absolutely. Yes. Yes. I have wonderful, memories of my time with children, with families. And every time I have the opportunity to go and do a Texas Rising Star assessment or work with teachers, I'm always reinvigorated just knowing that we are making a difference.
Well, I really appreciate you taking time out today, Kathy. It's a fantastic conversation. I've certainly learned a lot, and I'm sure our listeners have as well. If folks want to stay in touch with you, get a hold of you, find out what's going on in Kathy's world, what's the best way to see what you're up to?
Oh, probably. Well, I don't know. Probably my email,
Okay.
which I believe you have there. You're welcome to share that.
Okay, fantastic. Well, I thank you so much for being on the podcast today. I want to give you the last word. Any thoughts, comments, questions, closing remarks, jokes, anything you'd like to share as we close today out?
Oh, I guess I would just want to say, love those children and love those children well. And when you realize that you're appointing your career that you don't enjoy going to work, stop. The children are too important to spend their day with someone who doesn't really want to be there.
Wow, very powerful. Well, thank you so much for joining us. And thank you, everybody listening. We do appreciate you listening and supporting the podcast. Please like us and share us and rate us 5 stars only, if you will. But we do appreciate you. A lot more episodes coming up with some other fantastic experts like Kathy. So please stay tuned for future episodes for the Early Childhood Chats podcast. Andy saying thank you very much, and we'll see you on the next podcast.